Hello everyone, I'm Lao Gao. Today we're going to talk about an ancient site in Turkey. We've actually talked about another ancient site in Turkey before. The underground city of Cappadocia in Turkey that we talked about before was already pretty incredible, but what we're discussing today is even more amazing. It might even overturn human history. It's called Göbekli Tepe. So where is this site? It's located near the ancient city of Şanlıurfa in Turkey. According to archaeologists, actually not just according to their speculation, but based on their assessment, the stone formation dates back 12,000 years.
Isn't that exactly the time when Atlantis was said to have sunk?
Yeah, it was probably around that time, 5,000 years earlier than the Sumerian civilization, 6,000 years before Stonehenge in England, and 7,000 years before the pyramids. So if the stone formation really was left behind by a civilization, then the timeline of human civilization would instantly double. If we could push human civilization back to 12,000 years ago, then first of all, Atlantis could have existed, and so could the ancient Chinese myths. That's all possible too. Now, whether it's the Sumerian civilization from 6,500 years ago or this site from 12,000 years ago, how do we know their ages? It's determined using what's called the carbon-14 dating method. In our previous video about the Great Flood, we also mentioned that geologists determine the age of strata using a method called radiometric dating, and we said that this method is actually quite inaccurate. Although carbon-14 also uses the radioactivity of materials, it's actually much more accurate than radiometric dating. It's extremely accurate, very precise. Many people might ask, if carbon-14 dating is so accurate, why don't we use it to determine the age of geological strata? Well, it's not that it hasn't been tried. They did test it, and after testing, they found that all strata seem to be the same age. That immediately caused an uproar among theologians, geologists, and archaeologists. The theologians said, "See, I told you, this earth was created by God." So if all strata are the same age, that fits their view. But geologists immediately said, "No, don't get too excited yet. Carbon-14 dating shows strata as the same age because of its limitations. Carbon-14 dating can only be used on things with carbon, and it can't measure ages beyond 60,000 years. Our geological strata are hundreds of millions or even billions of years old. If you use a method that only goes up to 60,000 years, of course everything will come out as 60,000 years, right?" Then the archaeologist said, "All right, you two stop arguing. Let's just keep digging, right? For the purposes of human civilization, whether it's 6,000 years or 12,000 years, carbon-14 is sufficient." So how was this ancient site discovered? Well, in 1995, there was a shepherd who saw a big stone on the ground. He wanted to dig it up and take it home. But as he started digging, he realized he couldn't reach the bottom. The stone was especially long. And as he kept digging, he discovered there were carvings on the stone. He immediately contacted the local village. When the Turkish government saw it, they were amazed. This was an ancient site, so they informed all the major news outlets. Once the news broke, a very famous German archaeologist named Schmidt brought his archaeological team over. After investigating the site, he said, "Wow, this is incredible, a Neolithic site." However, during the investigation, they discovered that, in fact, this site had actually been found a long time ago. Back in 1963, the site had already been discovered. At that time, it was in a farmland not far from where the stone was found, and they uncovered many Stone Age artifacts there. Archaeologists came to excavate, but as they dug, they realized that the area had been severely damaged by years of farming, so it no longer held any archaeological value, and they abandoned it. This time, however, the place where the stone was found was at a certain distance from the farmland. That's why it has been so well preserved. So, starting in 1996, Schmidt led a German archaeological team to excavate here. Schmidt spent his whole life digging at this site. He kept working here until his death in 2014. The site has been excavated for 20 years, and even now, most of it hasn't been unearthed yet. They say it will take another 50 years to finish the excavation, so I should have the chance to see it completed in my lifetime. However, after Schmidt passed away, the excavation work stopped. Plus, since it's located near the border between Turkey and Syria, an area plagued by conflict, many international organizations have stepped in to protect the site. This also is one of the main reasons why the work is progressing so slowly.
I really think the area around Syria is a great place.
Right, that place is at the crossroads of the Eurasian continent, so the origins of many civilizations started from there.
The small region.
The prophets written about in the Bible all came from that city right next to the ruins we just mentioned. A very notable feature of these ruins is that there are many huge trapezoidal stones inside. Trapezoidal stones are basically tall, upright stones with a large stone laid horizontally on top. Some of them are nearly 6 meters high and weigh almost 15 tons. In total, more than 200 trapezoidal stones have been unearthed from this stone formation. These stones were quarried from very far away, transported here, and then stacked at this site. The whole project required a tremendous amount of manpower, and back then there were no vehicles. Moving just one of these stones really took 50 or 60 people. When you think about that, you really get a sense of what kind of construction crew this was. We're talking about several hundred or even 1,000 people. But here's the contradiction. In 12,000 BCE, most of the ruins we've discovered so far show that people back then were hunter-gatherers. They didn't live in settled communities. Every day, they would roam around looking for game. And when there were no more animals nearby, they'd move on to another place to hunt. Whether it was a nomadic or foraging lifestyle, the food supply was extremely limited, and they had to work for it every single day. How could there possibly be so many people with nothing better to do than carve and stack these things here? This thing must have had some practical value. Even if there were 500 or 600 or 1,000 people, building the stone formation would have taken at least several decades. That means these people would have had to stop hunting altogether just to build this.
And then someone had to provide them with food.
Someone to provide them food. It must have been like this, and this brings up mysteries. What was it for? Why was it so important? And who was attacking their food supply?
I get it. They built it for the gods, and the gods provided them with food.
Yes, that's the most reasonable explanation. This is just like those pyramids.
What?
Tens of thousands built the pyramids. If they lacked food, how could they haul huge stones? When people barely got food, how could they quarry stones?
Even now, we don't have that.
And also, there's another thing about this, there's another thing, and there's another thing, which is that there's another aspect that really puzzles archaeologists. There's another thing that really confuses archaeologists. This structure itself isn't a residence, and no traces of residential dwellings have been found around it. No one ever lived here. So many people spent 10 or even dozens of years building something that can't be lived in, and they didn't even live nearby. This is just like the pyramids. With the pyramids, it's said that tens of thousands of people built these things, but there's no evidence of a large population living nearby. That's really strange. Why would they travel such long distances here every day, maybe haul materials, and then go back home to sleep? So the archaeologists started looking for which architectural style the structure resembled among the ones that have been unearthed so far, trying to figure out what it was actually used for. But in the end, they found that its style was unlike any other building discovered on Earth. If you had to say it looked like something, maybe it's a bit like Stonehenge in England with those circles, but no one really knows what Stonehenge was for either. We'll make a special video about Stonehenge to explain it to everyone in the future. So when we see these circles, and especially since there are carvings on the stones, people quickly speculated that this might be related to religion. Even Schmidt thought that this must be a temple. If it really is a temple, then the issue becomes even bigger. A temple, after all, implies religious activities, and with religious activities there would be rituals, and with rituals there would be social classes. And such a massive project must have had a leader or some kind of leadership to organize everyone to do this, and this leadership would have been of a higher class than the others. So from both of these perspectives, it can be proven that there was a social hierarchy within this group. If there was a hierarchy, then it could be considered a civilization. And if it was a civilization, then Sumerian civilization wouldn't be the earliest, this would be the earliest. But if this really was a civilization, then that leads to a chain of questions like, who was the leader of this civilization? What is their history? Where did they come from? Actually, the Sumerian civilization itself has this mystery. How did it suddenly appear? Human civilization, in fact, often seems to have no gradual development. It just suddenly pops up out of nowhere. Later on, many scientists discovered a type of wild wheat around these ruins. The genes of this wild wheat are almost identical to those of most of the wheat we cultivate today. They're extremely similar. So, it's very likely that this wild wheat is the ancestor of the wheat we grow now. From this point, they suddenly felt like they understood something. They said it was this group of people who developed the earliest agriculture for humanity right here. They took the wild wheat back and tried to cultivate it, and as a result, modern agriculture was born. In our previous video at Chidian, we mentioned that agriculture was a kind of singularity for humanity. Why did agriculture suddenly emerge? We didn't know, but now it seems that agriculture came about precisely to build the stone circle. So originally, these people were hunters, but in order to build the stone circle, they were forced to gather together. But then they didn't have enough to eat, so what could they do? They had no choice but to look for something that could provide a stable food source, and that's how agriculture was developed out of necessity. In other words, agriculture actually came into being after the emergence of religion. But then, it's also strange, why did these people insist on building this stone circle? Right, I think there's only one possibility, and that's this stone circle. It's not just some symbolic object of spiritual belief, it actually had practical value. That's why these pragmatic early humans were so determined to build it. And it wasn't just because some leader said, if we build this, we'll have good weather and bountiful harvests. And everyone just followed along. They had to see real results before they do it. They must have seen actual results before they would spend 10 or even dozens of years building it. it. So now archaeologists are all speculating about what this thing was for. From this point, they suddenly felt like they understood something. They said it was this group of people who developed the earliest agriculture for humanity right here. They took the wild wheat back and tried to cultivate it, and as a result, modern agriculture was born. To figure out what it was used for, many people have focused on the carvings on these stones. On these trapezoidal stones, there are carvings of human hands and belts with the hands placed like this. It's the same gesture as the statues on Easter Island. So this gives the same feeling as the statues on Easter Island, except this is a flat stone slab.
A flat surface.
So it's a flat surface. Then they immediately guessed that this trapezoid shape, each one, represents a person, a particularly huge person. The horizontal stone on top represents the head, and the vertical part is the body. But what's strange is that the horizontal stone doesn't have a nose or eyes. We might imagine that maybe they thought carving faces was too troublesome, so they just didn't carve them. However, not far from here, a stone statue was unearthed. This statue is also from 12,000 years ago. This hand gesture is the same, and it has a face and eyes, but no mouth. This means that people at that time did have the skill to carve faces. The fact that they deliberately didn't carve faces on the other ones makes it very likely that these things were meant to be faceless.
It's not that it's mouth fixed.
Right. It's just that the face is hard to describe, so they didn't carve it. Also, there's another issue with the stone statue. It doesn't have a mouth. Many people speculate that it communicates through consciousness, so it doesn't need a mouth. And as for the stone formation, there's another mystery. The state of preservation is exceptionally good. Actually, quite a few things from 10,000 years ago have been found on Earth, but due to severe weathering and water erosion, almost nothing is left. But this site is different. When it was excavated, it was perfectly intact, just like it was when it was first buried. So intact, so perfectly preserved. Why is it able to stay in such good condition? It's because this site was deliberately buried by people. Most other ancient things were covered up by wind, water, or mudslides, but not this one. Here, people intentionally dug up soil from far away and brought it over to bury the site. And it wasn't just a simple burial. After building this huge stone formation, less than 1,000 years later, they covered it completely with earth and then built a smaller, identical version right on top of it. A few hundred years later, they buried the smaller one again and built an even smaller one on top. And finally, after burying the smallest one, they never touched it again. What does that mean? Hey, what does that mean? I don't know, but it just feels like logically, from the first time they buried it all the way to the last time, over more than 2,000 years, if human technology kept advancing, things should have gotten bigger, right? But instead, they kept making them smaller and rougher. It feels like human technology was regressing. So if technology was declining, why did they keep burying the old ones and building new ones? What was the purpose of that final burial? It's just that if I don't use this thing, then I just don't use it. Why do I have to bury it? It feels like they're trying to hide something, like this place can't be exposed and must be concealed.
This is a landmark for extraterrestrial beings.
It's possible, really. Maybe it's not from Earth civilization at all, but from an alien civilization. They used this thing, and after they were done with it, they didn't want other civilizations or anyone else on Earth at the time to discover it, so they buried it. So from this perspective, this thing must have some practical value. If it didn't, there would be no need to go to all the trouble of piling so much earth and using so much manpower to bury it.
So which came first, civilization or religion?
According to what we learned from our textbooks, civilization definitely came before religion. At first, people hunted, then came agriculture, and after agriculture developed, people started to gather together. And once people began living together, things similar to religion started to emerge.
But is it possible that a lack of food led to the emergence of religion, then people started living together, and only after that did agriculture develop?
Yes, that's exactly what this archaeological site shows. First there was religion, then human settlements and agriculture emerged. This was also a feature of the Sumerian civilization we discussed. Right from the beginning, as soon as people appeared, religion was already there.
Actually, the religion they believed in might have been a higher civilization,
What they originally believed was a higher civilization they had seen and experienced.
Right.
And from this higher civilization came later developments like agriculture and all sorts of progress, right? You get what I mean? Actually, what we believe in now, our religious faith, is also something like a higher civilization.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that its power is so great, it's just that its way of thinking is different from ours.
This thing is obviously separate from us, something with intelligence higher than ours.
It must be more intelligent than we are.
So where is it then? Have you noticed that people in ancient times were especially good at moving huge stones around? Yeah, right? This is also a kind of reminder, isn't it? You can clearly feel that their strength was out of proportion. Take the pyramids, for example, 2.3 million blocks, each one as big as a car, the largest weighing 60 tons. They handled them with ease and built things with such precision. But as time went on, as civilization advanced, people could only move smaller and smaller stones. They could no longer build such massive stone formations or stone structures, especially things like the pyramids. They interviewed a lot of architects and engineers, and they all said that if you can't do it in midair, if you can't direct it in the air, there's no way you can build it that precisely. With 2.3 million blocks, every single one has to be placed exactly where it belongs. Only after everything is standardized can you get it exactly right, lining up the very center, making sure the very top of the pyramid and the center point of the square base underground are off by just 1 centimeter.
That little bit shorter.
It's just a tiny bit off, but this slight tilt could be due to years and years of wind or something like that. And as we've said about the pyramid, its orientation north, south, east, and west.
Yeah,
It's really just that tiny bit off, but
is it really hard to build skyscrapers like that nowadays?
it's easy to build skyscrapers. We use concrete and steel, and they dry quickly. But if you try stacking huge stones, let me see you do that. So what was this thing for? Why did it catalyze agriculture's development in humans? Actually, after agriculture emerged, humanity developed rapidly, and its appearance made it possible. This was actually the real source that spurred humanity's rapid development. So what exactly were they worshipping inside? Who was this god they were worshipping?
That wild wheat might have been a gift from that god, you know.
Maybe it was the seeds he brought, right? He scattered them, gave a little demonstration. Look, what Kangxi sowed grows and you can eat it.
And that's why they worship him.
Right? It must have been like that.
Or maybe if you didn't make offerings, you'd suffer disasters, something that would make people.
Now that you mention this, it brings up a possibility about this era. At the beginning, we said that something major happened 12,000 years ago. What was that big event?
The Great Flood.
If this great flood really happened 12,000 years ago, then these people would be the survivors of that flood. If the Great Flood was a method used by the gods to punish humans, and most people were wiped out, then the very first thing this small group of survivors would do is...
I want revenge.
Impossible. His power is so immense that he wiped out most of humanity, and you still want revenge. Clearly, that's just asking for death, isn't it? The very first thing they would want to do is to break free from this fear. How to escape it, that's the main issue. And this is more important than anything else, even more important than eating or drinking, right?
I still can't swallow this anger.